Hi, this is Tori Wieldt with the Oracle Technology Network. This issue of Java Magazine is all about open source software, and what's happening in that space. So we've decided to talk to an open source expert about the very nature of what's going on. Simon Phipps is joined us today. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Tori. It's good to see you again.
So Simon Phipps is the president of the Open Source Initiative. He writes for Computer World and InfoWorld. He has his own blog called webmink.com. And he's been around the industry for about 30 years. We were together at Sun. I remember those days. And he's worked for IBM, Unisys, several other companies. So thank you for your time, Simon. It's good to talk to you.
It's good. These days I'm not focusing on Java as much as I used to. But I did a lot of work with Java back in the 90s. I helped establish IBM's Java Center over here in the UK in 1995, and worked extensively to develop the Java market during the late 90s. So at one point in my career, I was deeply immersed in Java activities.
Yeah, and thank you for your contribution to the community there. So recently you've been out giving a presentation entitled What's Driving Open Source, which I found the slides and it just seems a very interesting topic. And in it you posit that the drivers for open source software have changed from the original drivers 10, 15 years ago. So can you explain a little bit about that presentation?
Yes, so I've been giving this presentation about open source drivers a couple of times now. I gave it first of all at OSS 2012, which is the academic conference about open source that was held in Tunisia at the beginning of September. And we're coming up to the 15th anniversary of the point where people started using the term open source to associate with free software, where the imperative was a practical and pragmatic one rather than the ethical imperative that the Free Software Foundation associates with free software. And it struck me that the things that we used to talk about back in 1998 were all driven by frames and motivations which are really missing or are deprecated in the industry today. You know, in 1998, a big focus was saving a few bucks on licensing. Whereas today you look at the OpenStack Foundation and you see a number of players coming together to deal with cloud computing in a way where saving money on licensing is the furthest thing from their mind. What they're actually doing is they're leveraging the mutual collaboration of a community, and they're leveraging the know-how of a community of experts. And so as I thought about this more, I realized that really none of the drivers of open source in 1998 are still the things that are driving forward change and adoption of open source today in 2012. And that's where the talk arose.
Excellent. So can you just explain a little bit more? It seems fascinating that the whole idea of cloud computing is related to open source, and how it does seem to be like a symbiotic relationship between the two, but I was hoping you could explain it.
I mean, it's inevitable that it will be, because if you think about how cloud computing works, cloud computing is very much focused on separating means from function. So whereas in computing traditionally we're used to counting the number of CPUs or counting the amount of memory as a metric for how the software is deployed, in cloud computing you don't know anything about where the data is being processed, how it is being processed, what software is doing the processing. And consequently, in the proprietary software industry, where those things really matter because they're the means by which the proprietary software developer meters usage and operates the toll booth that collects money to pay for development. In the cloud computing world, all of those things are damaged. You know, in cloud computing, when I'm running a website and suddenly I get a lot of interest from the anonymous collective, pushing my hit rate up 100-fold, what I actually need to do is to go run a new instance of my stack on some machines on the other side of the world. I've no idea what they're running on. I'm just buying time from some cloud provider. All I care about is that I'm able to spin up all of the components of my stack, that they're on a new domain, a new IP address, other side of my load balancer. Now, as far as a proprietary software vendor is concerned, they would want to know, how many copies of the software are you running? How many cores is it running on? How many megabytes of memory per core? And all of those details are irrelevant. They're uncountable. And having to pay attention to them and count them is actually a fatal distraction in cloud computing. And as a consequence, cloud computing inevitably uses open source software, because open source software comes with the freedom to use the software anyhow you please. You can run as many copies on any kind of architecture, backed by whatever number of cores and CPUs you want, and there's no counting to do. It isn't just that it's $0, it's that no one cares how you're running it. And consequently, cloud computing has been a space where there's been enormous adoption of open source software, because fundamentally it's the only way to do it. If you were to try and run proprietary software in the cloud for any meaningful cloud computing application, you would immediately die of license toxicity. So that's meant that as people have gone for cloud computing and open source has been adopted, the natural instinct has been to use open source's attributes. So that's where OpenStack comes from. People using open source software and realizing that actually now they've learned to forget about price and counting cores and counting memory, they can now focus on collaboration. And as they focus on collaboration, the other factors that I believe are driving open source then begin to come to the front. Things like software patents, things like open source foundations, things like using licenses to develop community. So that drive towards cloud computing, along with the move towards big data, have both had a really important effect in taking away our fixation with free and replacing it with a fascination with function. And that I believe is a major dynamic in the change of open source over the last 15 years.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm going to change gears a little bit here, and I'm going to go from, the meta meaning of open source. As an individual software developer, what's my relationship to open source, and is it important? I came across an interesting article just recently on Computer World where they talked about, it really does help your career on a personal level. They actually talk about the classic stereotype that, these are unkept purists who turn up their nose at anything to do with money. And really that stereotype is going away because people are learning that experience with major open source projects can be a part of your resume or even a career unto itself. So have you seen that in your experience where it helps an individual developer to be involved in open source projects?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's a fascinating example that's in play at the moment over in the USA, where there's some new regulations happening at a federal level which are driving a new interest in gathering metrics about education in America's schools. And a group of superintendents, state superintendents, have got together, and they're now driving the adoption of a standard for data representation of student achievement. And a group of very unlikely sounding organizations has got together to fund an open source community to develop software for the schools and for the states to use. So that's the Gates Foundation and Carnegie Corporation have both got together to fund this open source community. Now, today, if you would like to get in on the ground floor of that new open source initiative in schools, there's an award of $75,000 that you can earn as an individual developer by proposing how you would write the software that teachers in individual schools would use to assess students and gather the appraisal data. And what the foundation will be looking for is your familiarity with open source as a technique, because all of the work is going to be licensed under the Apache license, and all the states are going to collaborate around the software. And so this is a place where to be an entrepreneur early in this educational software market that's about to arise, and to be an award winner from these big, rich foundations to make it all happen, familiarity with open source and the ability to work in an open source way is the primary quality that they're looking for. And I believe that's going to be increasingly the case. I know a number of former colleagues from Sun and IBM. I know people from the communities where I've been involved over the last decade who are increasingly people with a skill in a technology who move from job to job on the basis of their community relationships, on the basis of their technology skills, rather than joining a big corporation and staying there for their entire career. And I believe this is actually one of the dynamics of software development as the internet moves forward. I think that the best way to get a great, well-paid job is to focus, sharpen your skills, and get really good at doing some of these technology activities. And it's quite interesting that you know, the best skills to have are actually Java skills, because those skills turn out to be applicable in a wide range of open source contexts. You know, everybody is using Tomcat. Everybody is using JBoss. Well, they can't all be both using Tomcat and JBoss, but you know, those Java technologies, those open source Java technologies, are very prominent, very effective, and the skills for programming them are in high demand. So I think it's absolutely crucial for people to learn about open source as early as they can, and that means not just learning about the technology. That means learning how to develop in the open. It means learning how to develop collaboratively with people whose culture and whose understanding may differ from yours. It means learning to put your decision process in writing rather than always to have it spoken. And those skills actually need gaining early on in your career. So it's quite hard for people of my age. I wouldn't want to comment in your direction, Tori, but people of my age relearning how to do those things. It's actually the social skills that are hardest to get, not the technology skills. And those are what are in the hottest demand. People want to hire people who know how to drive a community, who know how to file a patch on a mailing list, justify its existence, and get it committed into the trunk. And consequently, I think the open source skills they're crucial to develop, and they're going to be key to future employment.
Right. Yeah, I remember that discussion at OSCON. That was very interesting, where people were talking about, yeah, your development skills will get you in the door, but you really do need to learn how to work with a community, build momentum for something that you want to get into the software. Those quote-unquote soft skills that you really need is more and more important as we move forward. That people really do need to know how to work with other people and not alienate people on mailing lists and things like that. Yep. So those are key skills to have. One more thing, you're president of the Open Source Initiative, and I know it has several roles in the open source community. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about the Open Source Initiative and what you're working on lately, because I know you're trying to get more involvement and promote it. So tell us about that.
Okay. So OSI was formed in 1998. It flowed out of this understanding that was dawning on the world that open source collaborative development was the natural way to develop software in a world where everyone was on the internet. And businesses were increasingly describing their work as open or as free software, when actually they weren't making the source available, and they weren't delivering the liberties that developers need to develop in community on the internet. Because that's what open source is about. Open source is not primarily about the cost of the software. It's not primarily actually about the license. It's primarily about developers being free to engage in collaborative development across networks. So OSI was formed in 1998 to advocate for that approach to software development, and in particular to define what an open source license was. Because open source licenses are the vehicle that delivers the flexibility and freedom to developing community to software developers. Now, fast forward nearly 15 years, and well, licenses are largely a solved problem. We know what an open source license is for. We've surely got enough of them. They only need a little bit of maintenance to keep them up and running, like the Mozilla license had last year. And so at OSI, we decided that we would take the next step forward and focus on the other aspect of our mission, which is to build bridges between open source communities as we advocate for the open source approach and educate people about it. In order to achieve that, we decided we would switch our governance from only being a board of directors to being a community of members who all have a say in both the governance and the activities of OSI. So at the beginning of 2012, we launched affiliate membership for not-for-profit organizations, and we got a good response from that with a range of organizations such as Debian, the Wikimedia Foundation, Creative Commons, KDE, Eclipse, the Linux Foundation, and a whole range more, joining OSI to stand alongside us as we reinvented ourselves, and then to agree that in the future they would like to play an active role in the running of the organization. Then at OSCON this summer, we launched individual membership. And this allows anyone in the world who supports open source as an approach to software development and as a vehicle for delivering software freedom to sign up as a member of OSI and gain access to the future benefits that we're going to be making available later this year, and also to help us to have the funds to take the next steps forward. So everyone who's watching this and all of the readers of Java Magazine are invited to join OSI. If you go to opensource.org/join, you'll find there's a really easy form you can fill out to join OSI now. And then later this year, towards the end of 2012, we aim to introduce corporate membership so that corporations and businesses that benefit from or advocate for open source are able to also join in with the community, have their voice heard, and contribute their resources to make great things happen between the individuals and the not-for-profit organizations that form the membership. Our goal is to be a venue where the sorts of things that are good for open source that you can't do anywhere else can happen. So by that, what I mean is if you want to start a new project, well, go to the Eclipse Foundation or go to the Apache Software Foundation and start your new open source development activity. If you want to run a user group in your city, do that where you are. But if you wanted to run an international fund to allow developers to attend development conferences, or if you wanted to start a network of women in open source for mutual encouragement and example, or if you wanted to create an academic repository of peer-reviewed research on open source, all of those things need a central organization that doesn't exist anywhere else apart from OSI. And so we want our members to come together at OSI and make great things happen using our resources over the coming years. So the last building block of that process goes into place towards the end of this year. And then next year, we're going to swing into action, taking member initiatives and giving them the resources they need to succeed. So please join. Get your Java user group to join. One of our early members was Java, the Java user group from Brazil.
Yes.
And they've joined, and they're one of our affiliate organizations. And I'd like every Java user group to join as an affiliate of OSI. I believe that will be really useful to allow organizations to network with each other, find each other's experiences and resources to make their whole user group activities richer on an international scale. So do please encourage people to join either as user groups or as individuals.
Absolutely. OSI, it looks like there's going to be a lot of new opportunities, and definitely open source is a great place to be right now. The Java community has had experience with that, but as you're saying, it sounds like a whole new chapter is opening up as the technology almost in a way is catching up to what developers want and need. There's going to be great opportunities to do things in a new way, to reach across boundaries, across various groups, and get what you need and then share it with other members of the community, which is what we've been all about all along. So Simon, I'm so glad you took the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it. Stay in touch. Let us know what you're doing, and we'd love to get information out to more of the Java community. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. I look forward to talking with you some more, Tori. Bye-bye.
All right. This is Tori Wieldt with the Oracle Technology Network.